This is part 3 of testing if I can make bad agar that won't grow anything by how I process it. In this part I'm going to discuss how I pressure cook and maybe a few tips. I'm going to talk about my flow hood startup and aseptic preparations of the hood, and then the difficulties I had doing a random pour of 4 batches of agar, and talk about inoculating those plates with transfers, clone tissue, and later on in part 4 I'll add inoculating with contaminants. Unless you're interested in the details of how the test has been set up, you can skip ahead to part 4 for the data gathering and conclusions. The previous video finished up mixing all 4 batches of agar, and 2 had been loaded into the pressure cooker and were preheating, and these 2 are the last ones to go in. This works preheating for media bottles, but I have broken ball jars trying to rush the heating, so I don't really turn the heat up on them until it's fully loaded, and add a little bit of vinegar to the water if there's any glass inside. 10 minutes of venting is fine for this load, especially since everything has already been boiling before I loaded it up. If the venting time has been adequate, then once the weighted plug is put on, the lock should rise pretty quick. Tapping both the lock and the safety plug helps them to rise and seat. Once the rocker starts moving, start your cycle timer. This one's going to be for 40 minutes. The gas has been heating on high, but once it starts rocking, I reduce it by at least half and start slowly lowering it to a cruising setting of about 1 3/4. I taped a plastic garbage bag over the front of my flow bench so that I can keep stuff out of it when it's not in use. And I reuse my gloves. Probably get a lot of flack for that, but if they're inside out, you can turn them back the other way just by holding the cuff and squeezing on them and get the fingers pop out. Coat them with alcohol and good to go. I haven't had much for contamination rate, so it seems to work. Wipe down all the surfaces from top to bottom and back near the filter towards the front. The alcohol bottles themselves are also touch points, so I try to spray a little bit on each of their triggers, and on the digital thermometer, spray the digital thermometer, and also the knob on the stir plates, any touch points. I avoid condensation and water on my glass petris by doing a dry heat sterilization at 400 Fahrenheit in my oven for at least an hour after they've reached that temperature. So I wrap them up in tin foil ahead of time, and then once they've cooled down, I put these PP5 plastic sleeves around them to keep the tinfoil clean. Then when I'm unwrapping the tinfoil, I know that what I'm touching is still sterile, or at least as clean as it can be, and I'm not going to be transferring something with my fingers onto the clean petri dishes. I'm going to cool the pressure cooker in the hood, so I use 2 wood slats as a trivet to protect the surface, and then I'll re-clean that surface after it's out. Back at the pressure cooker, it's the end of the 40-minute cycle, so I shut off the heat and let it start cooling. During this time, it will not suck in any contaminants from the outside air because the pressure inside the vessel is greater than the room. But once the lock drops, there's a chance it could pull in something as it cools. Thanks if you've stuck with me up to this point. I don't like my voice either, but it's a product of, or a side effect of, 10 years of daily cancer treatment, and the pills eventually take a toll. I'm facing the jar numbering label squares towards me so that I can hit them with the laser thermometer dot That way I get a consistent spot for taking a reading. And now just cleaning up where the wood slats were. I only have 2 stir plates, so treatment of the 4 Agar runs isn't quite the same. 2 will have to just cool on their own. I've charted the cooling rate of a 500 milliliter batch of Agar in my setup, and it's pretty consistent that I have 40 minutes of time that I can go do other stuff and know that I'm still okay for pouring at about 117 Fahrenheit in 44 minutes. Because this is a test, I stayed with the bottles as they were cooling. And since there are 2 liters of Agar to pour, I'll allow a little extra time and pour at 120. I'm going to create 4 stacks of petri dishes, but it's not really truly randomizing, but I am trying to spread the available supply across all 4 equally, as if dealing cards, I guess. That way, if there's any contamination or anything related to the glass, it's equally spread between all of the different samples that will be poured. And pre-labeling them. I had planned on rotating between the bottles as I poured into the plates, but I found out that they weren't cooling at the same rate. The first bottle to reach pouring temperature was number 1, which is telephone agar made per the manufacturer's instructions, where it's soaked 10 grams in cool water for 10 minutes, and then brought the pan up to a simmering boil, dissolved everything, added 7.5 grams of malt, and then poured it into the media bottle. This one turned out to have a little bit of sediment in the bottom. Bottle 4 here is how I made killer telephone agar in the past. It's 12 grams of agar, 7.5 malt. Microwave up the boiling water separately and then pour it over all the powders in the media bottle. This mix did not have any sediment. Next bottle up is telephone with 12 grams of agar, 7.5 malt. Mixed well, cold with water, and then microwaved and brought to a boil. This one had sediment in it. This is bottle number 3, which is the Fit Lane Agar. It was 8 grams of Fit Lane, 7.5 LME, mixed in cold water and then microwaved and brought to a boil. That bottle was clear with no sediment. Once the Fit Lane test plates were done, I continued pouring the rest of the bottle because I needed some good agar plates on hand. After the plates cool, I put them in PP5 sleeves and close them up with a piece of tape. I made the sleeves using a bar sealer and oven bags, and just sealed them to size so they'd fit over the glass petris. I can get 2 or 3 sleeves out of each oven bag. So to begin the testing, I had a plate of mycelium from December of 23, and we'll call that HB. I cut a 4x4 matrix and then used a separate scalpel for each test plate so there wouldn't be any cross-contamination questions. And I picked every other square or down a diagonal to go into one brand of agar. And I placed 4 transfers per plate to give it plenty of chances to grow. Doing just 1 plate from each of the agar batches. You may have noticed that I don't use background music, and that's a conscious choice on my part. I think it can be distracting, I'm comfortable with silence, and it avoids any issues with YouTube and copyrights. Grafting tape for wrapping the plates. Another set of test plates was created with tissue samples, and this again would be one plate from each agar batch. Trying to create a 4x4 matrix of tissue chunks proved to be a little bit challenging with slightly dull scalpel blade. Again, there will be 4 pieces of tissue per plate to give it plenty of opportunities to grow. Again, a separate scalpel was used for each plate. And of course, it's important to label your dishes, but I got the name wrong, so I'll change that in a moment. Instead of BV, it should be ACW. This marking is one of my quirks. When tissue jumps, I mark where it was and where it went because it can look like contamination when it just shows up randomly from where it used to be. And here I'll correct the name to ACW. The test is now set up and ready to start gathering data. So we've reached the end of this video, and the next one will be the data gathering and conclusions. If you haven't seen the first videos, you go back and check those out.